The afternoon sun reflected off the large glass windows of the luxury hospital in Crestwood Hills, where the air smelled of disinfectant, and silence was broken only by the soft beeping of monitors. In room 514, Edward Dawson lay on a bed with pristine white sheets, watching the nurse beside him. Young Sophia Parker, with her calm and gentle demeanor, adjusted his pillow as she checked the machines, her precise movements revealing years of practice and dedication. Edward was no ordinary patient. At 50, his face reflected both the beauty of a life of achievement and the deep wear of a chronic loneliness he carried silently. He had once been one of the most influential figures in the city's real estate world, but his accomplishments, grand as they were, had cost him everything that truly mattered. Without a family by his side and no friends to count on, he was now in the final stretch of his life, surrounded by luxury but deprived of love and connection. Sophia, on the other hand, was a young woman who, despite her age, bore the weight of many responsibilities. At 27, she lived between her duties at the hospital and caring for her sick mother, all while trying to keep her younger brother out of trouble. Her delicate face hid the dark circles from sleepless nights, and her smiles, though genuine, were subtle, as if each expression of joy needed to be carefully measured. However, with Edward, she found a kind of peace and purpose, seeing in him not just a patient but someone like herself, fighting a silent and painful battle. Edward, watching Sophia, asked in a low, almost whispered tone, "Sophia, do you believe life always gives us a second chance to make things right?" The question caught her off guard. Though she was used to hearing patients' confessions, this question carried a different weight, almost a plea for an answer that only someone deeply wounded would ask. She looked at Edward's tired face, trying to understand the pain he hid behind his eyes, which, though steady, no longer held their former brightness. "I think that, as long as we're here, there's still time to try," Sophia replied, with a sweetness Edward hadn't heard in a long time. Edward nodded thoughtfully. Sophia seemed to understand more than she let on. With his hands clasped together, he looked at her for a few moments in silence, as if gathering the courage to confess something that had weighed on his heart for years. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke. "I have a daughter, you know, but she left me a long time ago, because of me." The words hung in the air, full of bitterness and regret. It was rare for Edward to talk about Laura, his 30-year-old daughter, a woman he had barely seen in over a decade. With a lump in his throat, he remembered the arguments, the times he chose work and money over her presence. He knew losing Laura wasn't her fault. He had made choices that now haunted him. And yet, deep down, he desperately wished for a chance to go back, to fix what was broken between them. "She was everything to me," Edward continued, his voice faltering. "But I failed as a father, as a human being. And now, as time runs out, I wonder what it would be like to have her back, even just for a day." Sophia listened intently, and as she grasped the meaning of his words, a wave of compassion filled her heart. She felt compelled to do something she had never even considered in her career. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could offer Edward a moment of peace, a chance to feel that, in some way, he was loved. Before she could think twice, Sophia whispered, "Edward, what if I could be your daughter, just for a day?" The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Edward stared at her, surprised, unsure of how to respond. His eyes, once hardened by pain, softened, and he seemed to age backward, as if, for a moment, he returned to the man he had always wanted to be. He smiled slightly, a faint glimmer of hope stirring within him. Edward took a deep breath, and his melancholic smile took on a new brightness. There was something incredibly comforting in the simple thought that Sophia, this young woman who seemed to be filled with kindness, might offer him what he had lost. After a moment of silence, he accepted, in a whisper thick with emotion, "I'd love that, Sophia. But are you sure you want to do this? I don't want you to feel pity for me." His voice wavered. "It's not pity, Edward," she replied gently, placing her hand over his. "I know what it's like to wish someone was there, even if just for a little while." Sophia's words touched Edward's heart deeply. There was a quiet strength in her, the strength of someone who carried more than their own pain, someone who had sacrificed her life to care for others. Seeing her there, he felt a genuine gratitude he never imagined he would experience. For some reason, she was willing to be a part of this moment in his life, offering him something precious, something money could never buy, a last glimpse of what a real family bond might have been like. Resolute, Edward asked Sophia to bring a few casual clothes for this special day. As she left to get everything ready, he felt a light anxiety, a nervousness he had nearly forgotten how to feel. Not long after, Sophia returned, carrying a bag with clothes she'd managed to gather from the hospital. Edward swapped his usual hospital pajamas for a light shirt and cotton pants, simple clothes that made him look less sick and more human. And when Sophia returned to the room, he looked like a different man. She, too, had set aside her uniform, trading it for a light blouse and comfortable jeans like someone who was about to visit her father. When she entered and saw him ready, Sophia smiled with genuine warmth, and he, perhaps for the first time in years, returned a sincere smile, like a father eagerly awaiting his daughter's arrival. That moment, though simple, was already enough to fill a bit of the void he carried within. They decided to start their day in a small hospital lounge, decorated specifically to bring comfort to patients and their families. A vase of fresh flowers adorned the space, and a few cozy armchairs completed the scene. Sitting face to face, Edward and Sophia tried to conceal the emotions that overcame them, each in their own way. "So, Dad, do you want to tell me what I was like as a little girl?" Sophia asked playfully, putting on a childlike expression of curiosity. Edward let out a soft, emotional laugh. "Oh, you were a very spirited child, to say the least. Always curious, full of questions, and my God, how you loved adventures." He looked up at the ceiling, smiling as if he could see a distant memory. "I remember one summer when we went to a park, and you wanted to climb a tree, even after I warned you it was dangerous. Of course, you fell and sprained your ankle. But you didn't cry. You were so brave, saying you didn't want anyone to see you as weak." Sophia laughed, picturing little Laura, Edward's beloved daughter. Over the months of caring for him, she had learned about Edward's pain and regrets. But until that moment, she hadn't understood the depth of it. Now, hearing him relive these memories, she felt a unique closeness to him, as if, for a fleeting moment, she could really stand in his daughter's place. Edward sighed, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so proud of you, Laura. Or of you, Sophia." He hesitated, momentarily confused, then continued. "I just regret not being the father you needed." Sophia reached out and took Edward's hand firmly, offering him a calm he had long forgotten. "But today you're here, Edward. And if there's one thing I believe, it's that a father's love doesn't disappear, even with time." They looked at each other, a mixture of sadness and peace illuminating their faces. Edward seemed more alive, more human. There was a sweetness in him now that made him less like the relentless millionaire and more like a man in search of redemption. Sophia saw the light in his eyes and felt grateful to be there, to be a part of his life in a way that no one else could. As the hours passed, Edward's stories became more detailed. He shared funny episodes and tender moments that he hadn't been able to live with anyone for years. Between laughter and tears, Sophia realized that for Edward, this wasn't just a simple game of make-believe. It was a chance to feel a bit of the warmth that loneliness had stolen from him. At one point, Sophia asked, keeping her tone light, "And what about my mom? What was she like?" The question, though playful, cast a shadow over Edward's face. He hesitated, looking out the window, and then answered with a sigh. "Your mother was the love of my life. She was kind, caring, so full of life. But I lost my way, Sophia. I lost the balance between work and family, and by the time I realized it, it was too late. Your mother left, taking you with her. I lost you both all at once." Sophia felt her heart tighten. She knew that Edward's pain went far beyond his illness. It was the pain of someone who never learned to care for the connections that truly mattered. As she looked at him, fragile and vulnerable, she made a silent promise to herself. She would help this man find a little peace, even if only temporarily. However, before he could respond, the sound of firm footsteps echoed down the hallway. They turned, and the door swung open abruptly. There stood Laura, Edward's daughter. She looked at the scene in front of her, confusion and disbelief clouding her eyes, unable to grasp the connection between her father and this young nurse. Laura entered the room with a look of shock and disbelief. She hadn't known what to expect when visiting her father after so many years. But the scene before her was entirely unexpected. Edward and Sophia, so close, so at ease, they seemed to share something she couldn't quite understand. For a moment, her gaze flicked between Edward's face and Sophia's, a mixture of anger and sadness surfacing in her eyes. "What is going on here?" Laura's voice was cold and controlled, though it carried a deep, unmistakable pain. Edward opened his mouth to respond, but his voice failed him. He had longed for a reunion with Laura, but he'd never imagined she would find him like this, so entwined in this charade, this fleeting moment of false peace. Sophia, sensing the weight of the moment, let go of Edward's hand and tried to explain, but Laura had already taken a few steps forward, her eyes fixed on her father. "So, this is it?" she said, holding back tears with a bitter laugh. "You're here, playing the part of my father. With someone else?" She cast a look of disdain toward Sophia. As if some role, some act, could ever replace a real relationship. "Laura, please listen to me," Edward interrupted, reaching a hand toward her, but she stepped back, refusing to come closer. Pain was written across her face, years of hurt and resentment finally breaking the surface. Edward, for a moment, was speechless, overtaken by a sense of helplessness and regret. Sophia, standing beside him, saw the weight Laura carried and understood that for her, this scene was more than just a shock. It was an old wound torn open again, brutally. Taking a deep breath, Sophia stepped toward Laura, trying to ease the tension. "Laura, I'm Sophia, your father's nurse. Sophia hesitated, searching for the right words. "I know this might seem strange, but he just wanted to feel, for one day, the presence of someone who could fill a little of what he's lost." Laura stared at her, her face marked by anger and disbelief. "And what do you understand about what he's lost?" Laura shot back. "Do you have any idea what he put us through? What he put me through?" Her voice trembled, and for the first time, Laura's cold facade began to crack. Edward looked at his daughter with restrained desperation. I know I failed you, Laura." He tried to keep his voice steady, but it sounded fragile, almost brittle. "I know I can't undo the past, but I wanted so much to see you, to talk, to apologize. I just didn't know how," Laura interrupted with a bitter tone. "You never apologized. You just went on living your life surrounded by luxury, while my mother and I made do however we could. You don't understand how hard it was for us. You have no idea." She took a deep breath, as if each word drained her. "And now, after all this time, you think you have the right to create this theater? This game with someone else to ease your guilt?" Sophia felt the weight of the accusations and the unspoken words hanging in the air. Seeing Edward, weakened and frail, she knew he didn't have the strength to confront the past the way Laura needed. Trying to ease the tension, she approached Laura cautiously. "Laura, please, just hear him out. Your father knows he made mistakes. He lives with them every day. He only wanted a chance to make amends, if only for a day." But Laura was unmoved, the anger of years bubbling up. She cast one last cold look at her father before running out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The echo of the sound left the room in a heavy, oppressive silence. Watching his daughter walk away again, Edward felt devastated, his face heavy with regret and sadness. He lowered his head, breathing with difficulty. Sophia, still by his side, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, trying to offer him some calm, but Edward seemed lost, overtaken by the guilt that had haunted him for so long. "She hates me, Sophia. I think she'll always hate me." With tenderness, Sophia murmured, "No, Edward. She's just hurt. She's carried that pain since she was a child. But that doesn't mean she feels nothing for you. Sometimes love and hurt walk side by side." After a few moments in silence, Edward nodded, trying to take in those words. Sophia, sensing the need for action, offered to speak with Laura and try to convince her to listen to her father. Edward agreed, hesitant but hopeful. She left the room, leaving him alone, his breath unsteady and his heart heavy. In the hallway, Sophia found Laura standing beside a large window, gazing at the horizon with tears in her eyes. Approaching softly, she spoke. "Laura, I know it's hard, and I know you have your reasons to be hurt, but your father is changing. He really feels it. He truly does." Laura, still facing away, took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. "Changing? That's easy to say now when he doesn't have much time left," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "For all these years, he chose to ignore his family. And now that he's sick, he realizes what he lost. I'm not sure it's fair to me to go back, to reopen this wound. For what?" Sophia hesitated, but she knew this was a crucial moment. "Laura, maybe what he did can never be fixed, but you deserve the chance to express what you feel, to release this pain you've carried for so long. And maybe this is the opportunity to finally free yourself from it." Laura remained silent, staring at the floor. Those words echoed in her heart, bringing up memories she had tried to bury. After a moment, she turned around, her eyes still red. "So, do you really think he's changed?" Sophia nodded sincerely. "Yes, he's not the same man you knew. And I believe that, even if this reunion is hard, it could bring peace, both to him and to you." Laura wiped away a tear that insisted on falling and took a deep breath. Sophia's gentle presence and the weight of her words began to calm the turmoil inside her. Reluctant but moved, Laura finally murmured, "All right, I'll try." When Laura and Sophia returned to the room, Edward looked up and straightened in his chair, his face still weary but touched by a renewed hope. His daughter stopped at the door, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still as they looked at each other, both feeling the weight of this reunion, the years of separation, mistakes, and pain they would now have to confront. Laura took a deep breath, took a hesitant step toward her father, and seeing the fragility in his gaze, her hardened expression began to soften. Edward seemed so different from the cold, distant man she once knew. He was there, vulnerable, almost unrecognizable, stripped of the arrogance that used to define him. Sophia discreetly left the room, giving them privacy. Her now absent presence left Edward and Laura alone, each held captive by memories of a broken family. She sat in the chair across from him, a thick silence between them, and Edward's eyes shone with restrained emotion. He knew this might be his last chance to say what he felt. "Laura, I don't even know where to start," he confessed, his voice unsteady. "I spent so many years trying to justify my choices, thinking I was doing everything for you all, but really, I was just running away. And while I kept chasing more and more success, I lost the people I loved." Laura crossed her arms, a gesture to shield herself, and murmured, "I've heard that so many times, Dad. That you did everything for us. That your absences, your choices, were for our future. But what good is a future without a father?" Edward swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He wanted to argue, to have an explanation, but now he understood that nothing he could say would erase the scars he'd left. "I know I failed, Laura. You have no idea how many times I imagined a different life, one where I was there, where I gave you and your mother the time and love you deserved." Laura looked away, her eyes shimmering with tears she fought to hold back. "Mom, she died alone, you know," she whispered, her voice so low it almost disappeared into the room. "And I carried the pain for both of us, trying to be strong, but always wondering where you were, why you never came." Those words hit Edward like a blow. He knew about his ex-wife's death, but he had never understood the full extent of what Laura had endured alone. He looked at his daughter, feeling a deep, unshakable guilt. "There's no way to ask forgiveness for something like this, Laura. I know. But if you'll allow me, I'd like to offer you what's left of me. I can't reclaim the past, but maybe I can give you a little peace." Laura sighed, feeling the shield she had built over the years starting to crumble. She didn't want to, couldn't just forgive him. The weight of the pain was too heavy, the wounds felt insurmountable. Yet seeing him there, so fragile and honest, she felt torn between wanting to turn away and finally freeing herself from the bitterness she carried. After a long silence, she asked, almost in a whisper, "Why now, Dad? Why did you wait until you were sick to try and find me?" Edward swallowed hard, tears streaming down his face for the first time in years. "Because I was a coward, Laura. I spent years thinking I had all the time in the world to fix things, to be someone better. But the truth is, I was running from myself. When I got the diagnosis, when I learned my time was running out, I realized I was avoiding the things that truly mattered, and I realized that without you, I'm just nothing." Laura observed the genuine pain in Edward's eyes, and while part of her still felt hesitant, another part began to open up. She felt she had waited a lifetime to hear those words, to see her father not as the distant millionaire, but as a man capable of remorse, of recognizing his own mistakes. Still cautiously, she placed her hand on his, a gesture of silent reconciliation. Edward, surprised and moved, felt the warmth of that hand like a miracle, a sign that despite everything, she was willing to try. "I can't promise it'll be easy," Laura said quietly, looking down at their joined hands. "But I think we can try, for us and for Mom. Maybe then I'll be able to find the peace I've been searching for so long." Edward gently squeezed her hand, his teary eyes revealing a deep gratitude. For a few minutes they remained in silence, the unspoken words filling the space between them. It was as if in that moment the wounds began, little by little, to heal. At that moment, Sophia returned to the room, and seeing the two side by side, she smiled in satisfaction and relief. She knew it hadn't been an easy road, but she felt grateful to have given Edward one last chance to reconnect with his daughter. Her presence, discreet and full of empathy, seemed to further soothe the atmosphere. Edward, looking at the nurse who had offered him so much in recent months, smiled and, in a tender gesture, murmured, "Thank you, Sophia. You were more than I could have hoped for." Sophia just nodded, emotional, knowing that in that moment words were unnecessary. For her, Edward's smile and Laura's gesture meant more than any other reward. With a lighter heart, Edward looked at Laura, and for the first time in a long time felt at peace. Although he knew death was near, that moment of reconciliation gave him the strength and serenity to face what was coming. The time he had left would now be marked by his daughter's presence, and he would do everything possible to make those days full of love and understanding. A few days later, Edward passed away peacefully, with Laura by his side, holding his hand. After the funeral, Sophia and Laura stayed in touch, and as part of Edward's legacy, he left a significant donation to the hospital and to help with Sophia's mother's treatment, an act that would perpetuate the impact of his redemption. Laura, though still feeling the weight of her father's absence, knew that their last encounter had brought her the peace she had longed for. Amid the pain and mistakes of the past, Edward and Laura rediscovered what it means to be family, and Sophia's compassion was the link that made this transformation possible, a hopeful and reconciliatory ending, reminding us that forgiveness is a healing force, even in the final moments. Did you enjoy this story? If so, like and share. Subscribe to the channel to catch touching stories like this one almost every day. Click on the screen now to watch another moving story. See you in the next video.